Dispatch reached me on Route 19, roughly 3 miles shy of the county boundary. Report of a missing child at Rimrock Overlook. Family hails from Eerie, a 10-year-old boy. Last spotted 20 minutes earlier close to the East Trail marker. Parents already present at the scene. That summed up the call. I switched on the lights and radioed back to acknowledge I was en route. The speaker crackled briefly. Then Linda's voice cut in, informing me that Beverly Patterson was already heading there equipped with search equipment, and I needed to switch over to Channel 3 for coordination when I arrived. I gave 2 quick clicks in response and pressed the Crown Vic forward harder than was probably wise on that narrow access road. The car shuddered and bounced across every pothole and frost-induced ridge as though it might fall to pieces, yet I held the accelerator steady. Rimrock lay around 40 minutes from town via the Valley Road, or closer to 25 if you took the shortcut slicing through the state forest. I chose the access road. Trees flashed by on either side, largely stripped of leaves at this season, and the paved surface gave way to gravel after about the 3rd mile. A cloud of dust rose in my wake. I watched it in the rearview mirror, a thick gray column lingering in the still air without drifting down. In my 8 years working for the county, I'd handled 2 previous missing child incidents. The first involved a boy who strayed into a cornfield, curled up beneath an abandoned tarp and dozed off. We located him within 40 minutes. The second concerned a girl who lost her bearings on a state park path and wandered to a campground only half a mile from where her frantic parents waited. She was happily munching on a hot dog by the time we pulled up. That search lasted 3 hours, but she came through unharmed. This situation already carried a different weight, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Perhaps it was the terrain itself. Rimrock wasn't forgiving ground. Steep rock faces everywhere, unstable shale slopes, sheer drops plunging 30 or 40 feet onto unforgiving surfaces below. Visitors drove up mainly for the scenic vista and photo opportunities, not for challenging hikes. When a 10-year-old vanished in a place like that, it usually meant he'd either scrambled onto some reckless perch or tumbled into something far more dangerous. The parking area appeared right after a sharp switchback, and even from a distance I could make out the group gathered near the trailhead, perhaps a dozen ordinary folks milling about, several holding phones, one man in a bright neon windbreaker gesturing wildly towards somebody else. Beverly's patrol car was parked diagonally, taking up 2 spots, its rear hatch standing open. I eased in next to it and shut off the motor. The air carried the scent of pine needles mixed with chilly soil. Early April still held that transitional period when frost clung to the ground well into midday, and the breeze bit sharply. I reached over for my jacket on the passenger seat and stepped outside. Beverly stood at the back of her vehicle, uncoiling lengths of rope and attaching carabiners to an equipment duffel. She glanced up as I approached. "Parents are over by the Overlook railing," she told me. "Mother's name is Virginia, father's Aiden. The boy is Edward. According to them, he wandered away from the designated trail roughly 30 minutes back and never returned. They had a vague idea of his direction. The mom explained he was staring at something among the rocks. She looked away just long enough to pick up a water bottle, and when she turned back, he had vanished." Beverly closed the bag with a zip and hoisted it onto her shoulder. "I've strung tape across the primary trail entrance. About 15 hikers are backed up and eager to continue. I instructed them to hold off." I gave a nod. "Did anybody else head in searching for him?" "Not as far as I'm aware. I arrived maybe 10 minutes ago, and by then the parents were already in full panic mode. The father seemed ready to rappel down on his own, but I ordered him to remain where he was. That had been the correct decision. The absolute last thing required was 2 individuals trapped on a narrow ledge rather than just the one child. I trailed Beverly along the path leading toward the overlook. The distance wasn't great, perhaps 200 yards, but the slope proved steep enough that my boots slid slightly on the scattered loose stones. The bystanders clustered near the trailhead observed us walking past. One lady called out, asking whether we'd located him already. I stayed silent. The overlook itself consisted of a broad, level stone ledge extending outward above a steep void. A guardrail enclosed 3 sides, standing about waist-high, coated in brown paint designed to merge with the natural park surroundings. Beyond the railing, the terrain plunged into a chaotic jumble of rock ledges, sparse scrub vegetation, and haphazardly strewn boulders. On a clear day, the panorama stretched out for miles in every direction. Today the sky hung heavy with a dull, yellowish haze reminiscent of aged parchment. Aiden and Virginia Woods were huddled tight against the railing on the eastern edge. Virginia gripped the top rail so hard her knuckles stood out stark white. Aiden stood right next to her, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders, while the other gestured downward toward the rocks far below. They both spun around the moment they heard our footsteps approaching. "He went down there," Virginia blurted before I even had a chance to identify myself. Her tone sounded restrained, almost forcibly calm, but a distinct tremor ran beneath every word. "He was staring at something, then he simply stepped over the edge and I lost sight of him completely." I stepped up beside her and followed the line of her pointing finger. The rock ledges descended in irregular, jagged steps, some broad and level, others slim and sharply tilted. There were countless spots where a child could lose his footing, get pinned, or vanish entirely from view. Clumps of dry brush sprouted wherever pockets of soil had gathered in the fissures. A handful of stunted, wind-twisted trees clung stubbornly to the stone farther down the slope. "Did he say anything at all before he went over the side?" I asked. Aiden gave a quick shake of his head. He just walked straight to the railing, peered down, and then climbed right over. We shouted at him to stop, but he didn't pay any attention. He gets like that sometimes, completely fixated on whatever caught his eye. "How much time passed between him going over and when you called it in?" "About 5 minutes, Virginia answered. "We yelled his name first. Then Aiden started to climb down after him, but the rocks were shifting too much underfoot, so I made him come back up. After that, we phoned it in." 5 minutes wasn't terrible timing. In that span, a child could travel a surprising distance, but he could also hunker down if frightened or injured and stay exactly where he was. I swept my gaze across the ledges once more, searching for any flash of color or sign of motion. Nothing stood out. "What was he dressed in?" I asked. "Blue jacket," Virginia replied. "Dark blue jeans and red sneakers." Red sneakers. That detail helped. Bright red stood out far better against gray stone and dull brush than darker shades ever would. I eased back from the railing and keyed my radio. "Patterson, you got the equipment ready?" Beverly's reply came through with a faint crackle. "Affirmative. Want me to rig an anchor point?" "Not just yet. I'm going to check the upper ledges first on foot. Maintain the perimeter, keep everyone back." "Copy that." I turned to face the parents. "I need both of you to remain right here. If he climbs back up by himself, get on the radio immediately. Channel 3. Virginia's expression suggested she wanted to protest, but Aiden tightened his grip on her shoulder and gave me a firm nod. "We'll stay put." I continued past the overlook along the trail until the ground transitioned abruptly from firm dirt to smooth, exposed bedrock. Footing grew trickier almost at once, and I had to pay close attention to each step. Here and there I spotted scuff marks, but nothing definitive. Too many hikers had passed through over time. Distinguishing recent tracks from older ones was nearly impossible. Beverly caught up with me roughly 20 yards farther along. She carried the gear bag slung across her back and held a handheld spotlight, even though full daylight still held. Smart move. The uneven rock face threw strange, deep shadows in unexpected places. "Anything yet?" she asked. "Not so far." We pressed on, eyes sweeping side to side. I searched for snapped twigs, freshly turned soil, or any anomaly that broke the natural pattern of the landscape. A slight breeze stirred, whistling faintly through the gaps in the rocks below us. A rush of colder air rose from somewhere farther down. That sort of thing occurred occasionally in karst terrain, hidden caves and narrow fissures that acted like natural vents. Then I noticed them, faint but unmistakably recent scuff marks on a flat ledge roughly 10 feet below our position. The stone itself was a pale, almost silvery gray, making the darker streaks stand out clearly as though something heavy had been dragged across it not long ago. I pointed. Beverly leaned forward to peer over. Could be him. I located a spot where the drop measured only about 6 feet and eased myself down. The landing felt firm, no shifting gravel or loose slabs. Beverly came after me, lowering the gear bag carefully before dropping down beside it. The shelf extended perhaps 15 feet in length and 8 feet across, mostly level except for a gentle hump along one edge. And positioned precisely in the center, side by side as though arranged with care, sat a pair of red sneakers. I froze. The shoes rested there deliberately, neatly aligned, toes facing the same way, laces still securely tied. They hadn't been kicked off in a struggle or tossed aside carelessly. Someone had placed them. "That's odd," Beverly murmured. "Yes, very odd." I approached slowly and crouched next to them. Children's sizes, roughly appropriate for a 10-year-old. The insides showed no dirt, no traces of blood, no wear on the soles beyond normal use. They appeared nearly pristine. "Edward," I called. My voice echoed off the surrounding stone and gradually died away. Silence answered. Beverly swept the shelf methodically with her spotlight, unnecessary in the daylight but useful for cutting through pockets of shade. The beam glided across rock and sparse vegetation before pausing on something I'd overlooked entirely. A narrow fissure, perhaps 12 inches across, running along the base of the low rise where this shelf joined the next lower tier. I moved closer. At first glance it seemed insignificant, just another crack splitting the stone. But as I knelt right beside it, I felt a steady current of air rising from within. Cold. And the smell was off, metallic, damp, faintly coppery, reminiscent of coins left soaking in water. I switched on my own flashlight and directed the beam into the opening. The light traveled downward but found no end. The darkness simply absorbed it. "We ought to secure the area," Beverly said from behind me. "Wait for proper ropes, additional lighting, and call the full search and rescue crew." I pulled out my small notebook, jotted the current time, 11:43, and noted the precise coordinates. East shelf below Overlook, approximately 15 yards south of primary trail access. My writing came out hurried, slightly uneven. I snapped the pen closed, tucked the notebook away inside my jacket. The airflow emerging from that fissure felt substantial, not the faint draft of a shallow crevice, but something drawn from a much larger void. A space wide enough, deep enough to conceal a child. I sat on the lip of the crack, legs hanging into the blackness, and let myself drop. Once past the initial lip, the opening proved wider than it appeared from above. I fell perhaps 6 feet before my boot struck solid surface, not level, but slanted sharply downward, forcing me to lean back toward the entrance to keep my balance. One hand braced against the rough wall while the other drew my flashlight. The beam sliced through darkness that felt dense and oppressive, the sort of thick gloom found in long-sealed cellars. I pointed the light ahead and realized the floor wasn't truly a floor at all. It was the beginning of a tunnel angling steeply away into deeper shadow. Broad enough to walk through upright in most places, roughly 4 feet wide. The ceiling dipped low enough in spots that I'd need to stoop. I reached for the radio and pressed the transmit button twice. Nothing. No hiss of static, no response from Beverly asking for an update. Just empty silence where the carrier tone normally hummed. I twisted the channel selector, glanced at the battery gauge. Fully charged, I'd swapped it out that very morning before roll call. I cycled through channels 3, 4, 5. Dead air on every one. That unsettled me more than a little. I reclipped the radio to my belt and stood motionless for a moment, straining to catch any sound from above. Beverly's footsteps on the shelf, the click of her spotlight, anything. I heard nothing at all. No breeze, no distant birdsong, no faint voices carrying from the overlook where the parents and other people waited. The constant background murmur of the forest that had surrounded me since I arrived in the parking lot had vanished entirely, cut off as cleanly as flipping a switch. I told myself it was the thickness of the rock interfering with the radio signal and muffling external noise. It wasn't unheard of in this part of the state forest, especially near the old quarry sites. Dead zones existed in spots like this, places where the radio signal flatlined and dispatch couldn't get through. You had to backtrack, climb higher, find open sky to call in. I didn't enjoy the thought, but I'd seen it happen before. It wasn't impossible. I kept the flashlight beam trained down the tunnel and started walking. The air down here felt colder, not the sharp bite of outdoors, but a heavy, wet chill that soaked straight through layers and pressed cold against your skin like damp cloth. That metallic smell returned, stronger now. Copper pennies mixed with something earthier, maybe moss, or dissolved iron leaching from the stone into standing water somewhere deeper. The passage bent left after about 10 feet. I ducked beneath a sagging section where the ceiling dropped abruptly and trailed my left hand along the wall for balance. The rock felt unnaturally smooth in places, slick with condensation. My palm came away glistening. I swung the light across the right wall and stopped cold. Horizontal grooves had been carved into the stone. Parallel lines spaced roughly a foot apart, climbing the wall in a neat vertical row. Each cut deep enough to hook fingers into, edges rounded and polished dark from repeated contact, hands gripping, boots pressing over and over. I leaned in, played the beam directly over them. These weren't random fractures or natural wear. Someone had deliberately chiseled them, shaped hand and footholds into solid rock, and used the makeshift ladder so often that the stone had gone glossy and darkened where skin and rubber had rubbed for years, maybe decades. I had no explanation for why such a thing existed beneath Rimrock Overlook. No idea who would invest the effort to carve it, or how long it had sat hidden. But the grooves looked ancient, worn to a patina that spoke of heavy, repeated use. I pressed forward. The tunnel continued downward at a gentle slope for another 20 feet before flattening. The walls eased back a little. My light no longer automatically caught both sides unless I swept it sideways. "Edward," I called. The sound didn't bounce or linger. It died instantly, flat, swallowed by the air. I raised my voice. "Edward Wood, your parents are looking for you." Silence. Another 15 feet and the beam picked up something small, low against the wall ahead. I approached slowly. Edward sat on the tunnel floor, back braced against the rock, knees hugged tight to his chest. His jacket remained zipped to the chin. Jeans showed dirt at the knees but no rips or tears. His eyes were open, calm. When the light washed over his face, he looked straight at me, no squint, no hand raised to shield his eyes. He simply sat. I crouched a safe distance away, keeping the flashlight tilted low so the glare wouldn't blind him. "Edward." He blinked once, nodded. "You okay? Hurt anywhere?" He shook his head. I swept the light over him methodically. No visible blood, no obvious fractures, no swelling. His hands rested on his knees, both palms coated in something dark and wet-looking. Black dust, mud, soot. "What's on your hands?" I asked. He glanced down, turned them over slowly as though studying them himself. "I don't know." His tone stayed quiet, even detached, not frightened, not bewildered, just stating a fact. "Did you fall down here?" "No." "Then how'd you get down?" "I climbed." I looked back toward the entrance, the carved grooves. "You used the ladder in the wall." He nodded. "Why?" Edward's gaze drifted past my shoulder, fixed on the darkness stretching deeper into the tunnel behind me. They wanted me to be quiet. I didn't turn, kept watching him. Who did? The people under the rock. I waited. He continued staring past me, expression placid, far too composed for a 10-year-old who'd been missing nearly 40 minutes inside an underground passage beneath a public overlook. "Their river got blocked," he said. "They can't sleep. They told me if I came down here and stayed quiet, they could rest." I'd responded to plenty of missing child calls over the years. Kids in shock, fear, disorientation, or after a bump to the head often said bizarre things. Imaginary companions, talking animals guiding them, vivid dreams that felt more real than waking life. I never challenged those stories in the moment, and I had no intention of challenging Edward now. I stood, keeping my body positioned between him and the tunnel extending behind me. "Okay, let's get you back up to your parents." He looked up at me, blinked again. "Okay." I extended my hand. He took it without hesitation, let me draw him to his feet. No protest, no questions. He simply stood and brushed at his jeans with those blackened palms. I turned him gently toward the entrance and aimed the flashlight ahead. "Walk in front of me, steady steps. If you stumble, I've got you." He started forward. I rested one hand lightly on his shoulder for guidance, kept the other on the light. Behind us, the tunnel felt alive, the cold, wet air shifting through it, carrying that sharp, metallic edge. I refused to glance back. We reached the curve and the low overhang. Edward ducked beneath it without prompting. I followed, beam fixed on the rising slope ahead. The carved groove stood out plainly now. Edward reached for the first one without pause, pulling himself up the incline as though he'd rehearsed the motion. I stayed right behind, one hand steady on his back, the other gripping rock for support. We climbed. The crack appeared overhead, a narrow ribbon of pale gray daylight slicing the blackness. I could see the rough edges of the opening, the shelf beyond. Edward reached the gap first. I boosted him through, then hauled myself up after him. The instant my shoulders cleared the fissure, reality flooded back. Dogs barking furiously in the distance, sharp, frantic. Voices shouting from farther along the shelf. My radio hissed to life with static bursts. I rolled onto solid stone and pulled Edward clear of the opening. Beverly stood waiting, spotlight gripped in one hand, radio in the other, face drawn tight with worry. "Where the hell were you? I've been trying to reach you for 10 minutes straight." I glanced back at the crack. Cold air still rose from it, but thinner now, weaker, the metallic scent already dissipating. I rose, brushed damp rock dust from my jacket, found him. Edward sat quietly on the shelf beside his red sneakers, His palms remained stained black. He said nothing. The dogs kept barking. 2 days after we brought Edward Wood up from that fissure, the incident refused to leave me alone. Not in the ordinary way you mentally replay a call, checking for errors, second-guessing decisions, running the adrenaline-fueled review. This felt heavier, lodged deep in my chest like something immovable. I jolt awake at 4 a.m., pulse already hammering, mind fixed on those worn ladder grooves in the stone, the effortless way Edward had reached for them without looking. The total, unnatural silence the moment I dropped below the surface, like the entire world above had been muted. I tried to dismiss it. The boy was safe. Parents had driven him back to Eerie. Case officially closed. Beverly submitted the report. I countersigned the forms. That should have been the end. Yet the image of the sneakers persisted, perfectly clean, laces neatly tied, placed side by side in the exact center of the shelf, as though arranged with intention. On the third morning, I slid behind the wheel of the Crown Vic before my shift began and drove back to Rimrock without notifying anyone, without making any entry in the log. The access road lay deserted. No early morning hikers. Still too early for weekend crowds. I parked in the same spot as before and hiked the trail alone. Boots ground over gravel, then hushed on packed dirt. The forest carried the scent of wet bark and decaying leaves. My breath fogged in the chill. I passed the Overlook platform, railing empty. No yellow tape. Beverly had removed it the same afternoon we recovered the boy. I continued to the shelf where I'd gone over the edge. Flat stone expanse, roughly 15 feet long. I crouched at the lip and stared down at the crack, still there, still black. That was when I noticed the stones. Arranged in a precise spiral perhaps 3 feet in diameter, positioned about 10 feet from the fissure. Smooth, flat river rocks, the polished kind you see in stream beds. Someone had laid them in a tight, overlapping coil, each stone touching the next, the entire pattern secured with bright red twine. The twine appeared brand new, synthetic, vivid hardware store red. I stood motionless, staring for a solid minute. The spiral was meticulous, clean lines, no misplaced stones. It hadn't existed 2 days earlier. I was certain. I'd examined every inch of that shelf when we pulled Edward out. I would have seen it. I knelt beside the arrangement without touching a thing, just observed. The undersides of the stones looked damp where they contacted the bedrock. Twine had been knotted tightly at regular intervals, locking the shape in place. Not careless. Someone had taken time, shown deliberate care. Probably a hiker's marker, I reasoned. Volunteers occasionally left cairns, stacked stones, or creative arrangements to flag side paths or points of interest. People got artistic in state parks. I'd encountered similar things at parks farther south, not every day, but not unheard of. I pulled out my notebook and recorded the details. Riverstone spiral pattern, bound with red twine, approx. 3 ft diameter, located 10 ft northwest of crack. Appears recent. I noted the date and exact time, logged it the same way I document any field observation. Then I returned to the car and drove to the barracks for my shift. That evening, Cadden summoned me to his office. I'd been at my desk slogging through paperwork when he appeared in the doorway. "McCormick, in here." His voice carried no heat, no warmth, just neutral flatness. I followed him down the corridor. He closed the door behind us and nodded toward the chair opposite his desk. I sat. He stood a moment longer, then settled into his chair and clasped his hands on the blotter. "Spoke with Bo Wells today," Cadden said. Bo, Rimrock's park manager. Older man, always in the standard green State Field shirt with the embroidered logo stitched on the pocket. I'd crossed paths with him maybe twice. "Okay," I replied. "He called this morning. Said he'd heard we conducted a search operation at the Overlook 2 days ago." I nodded. "We did. Missing child. Located him below the main trail. Parents took him home." Cadden held my gaze for a long stretch. His expression remained unchanged. "Bo says there is no crack at Rimrock," he continued. "No cave, no tunnel, nothing beneath that overlook except solid bedrock and a straight 100-foot drop." I said nothing. "He says no rescue took place," Cadden went on. "No call came into his staff. No incident report was ever filed with the Park Service. He checked the logs himself." My chest tightened instantly, but I forced my expression to stay even, unreadable. "We pulled a kid out of a tunnel," I said. "Beverly was right there with me. The parents were on scene. I wrote the report. You read it." Cadden leaned forward slightly. "That's exactly why I'm asking." He reached for a manila folder on his desk, flipped it open, and slid a single printed sheet across the blotter toward me. "Dispatch log from 2 days ago. I pulled it myself." I scanned the page. The timestamps were off. I clearly remembered the call hitting at 11:43. I jotted it in my notebook the moment it came through. But here the log recorded the initial report at 11:58, a full 15 minutes later, and the narrative summary was stripped bare. "Missing juvenile located on trail below Overlook. Returned unharmed to parents. No injuries reported. Scene cleared." No mention of a fissure, no tunnel, no descent, nothing. I lifted my eyes to meet his. "This isn't accurate." "That's the official record," he replied, voice level. "I was there. Dispatch called at 11:43. I entered the crack at approximately 11:50, brought the boy up at 12:04. Beverly can back every detail." Cadden's jaw muscle flexed once. Beverly's report aligns with the log. The words landed like a punch I hadn't seen coming. I sat perfectly still while the room seemed to tilt a fraction. "She was on the radio the entire time," I said slowly. "She called for backup. She watched me go down. Her report states the child wandered off the marked trail," Cadden cut in. "You located him sitting on a lower rock shelf. No tunnel, no vertical drop. You escorted him back up the natural slope and released the scene." I stared at him, trying to force the pieces to fit. Beverly had been standing 10 feet away. She aimed her spotlight directly into the fissure. She'd seen me lower myself through. She'd been there when sound snapped back and the radio crackled alive again. "That's not what happened," I said. Cadden eased back in his chair, hands still folded. "Bo Wells says the Overlook has been inspected multiple times, recently and historically. Solid bedrock. No openings, no voids, just a sheer drop of about 100 feet. Then Bo's mistaken, or lying." Something flickered behind Cadden's eyes, caution, maybe warning, but his face stayed calm. "Careful." I clamped my mouth shut. "Here, what matters," he continued. "The Park Service insists nothing unusual occurred. Dispatch logs reflect the same. Beverly's documentation matches. The only account claiming otherwise is yours. The parents already left for Eerie. No forwarding contact listed. No request for follow-up." I held his gaze. "You're telling me I fabricated the whole thing?" "I'm telling you the documented record contradicts your version, and I need to know whether that's going to become an issue." My pulse thundered in my ears. I counted 3 slow breaths before answering. "No issue," I said. He studied me another long moment, then gave a single nod and closed the folder with a soft snap. "Good. Go home. Get some rest." I stood, walked out, closed the door quietly behind me. I didn't drive home. I sat in the Crown Vic in the barracks lot, engine off, hands still on the wheel, and ran through every second again in my mind. The initial call, the descent, the ladder grooves worn glassy from use, Edward's calm face and those blackened palms, the absolute dead silence the instant I dropped below the surface. Beverly had been standing right there. I knew she had. But her report said otherwise. And the dispatch log had been altered, not merely edited but rewritten from scratch. Timestamps shifted, details erased and replaced. The realization settled cold and heavy. Someone had scrubbed the entire incident. Whatever lay beneath that overlook, whatever the tunnel really was, people were deliberately hiding it. I turned the key, started the engine, and drove home. Sleep never came. I sat at the kitchen table until the clock read 4:00 a.m., notebook open in front of me, rereading every line I'd written that day. Then I stood, walked to the garage, grabbed the shovel and placed it in the trunk. I was back at Rimrock before first light. The access road stretched black and deserted. No other vehicles, no early risers. The forest lay quiet except for the low rustle of wind through bare branches. I parked, retrieved the shovel and flashlight, and hiked the trail. The beam bounced ahead of me, turning my breath into pale clouds. When I reached the shelf, I paused and swept the light across the stone. The spiral of river stones remained exactly where I'd left it, tight coil, red twine still taut. I approached, crouched, set the flashlight on the ground angled toward the arrangement, and began digging carefully around the outer edge. The soil layer was thin, mostly decayed leaves, pine needles, and loose dirt over bedrock. I worked in small sections, scraping away material methodically. 6 inches down, the shovel blade struck something that rang differently. Not stone, but wood. I set the shovel aside and brushed dirt away with my hands. Old timber, rotten in spots, splintered but still holding shape. I cleared more soil. The wood formed a square frame, roughly 3 feet on each side. A hatch. I excavated the full perimeter. Dark, age-blackened planks. Iron hinges on one side, heavily rusted but intact. No visible handle or latch, just the frame and those corroded hinges. I sat back on my heels and stared. The spiral of stones had been positioned directly over the hatch, either marking it or concealing it. I lifted the flashlight and played the beam across the weathered surface. Cracks webbed the wood, but the structure was unmistakable. A covered opening, something meant to be lifted and passed through. I didn't hesitate long. I laid the shovel down, gripped the frame with both hands, and pulled. The wood groaned in protest. One hinge sheared off with a sharp metallic snap. The entire panel tilted sideways and dropped open. A cascade of dirt and leaf debris spilled into the gap below. Stone steps appeared, narrow, 7 or 8 of them, descending straight down into blackness. Each tread carved directly from the bedrock, centers worn concave and glossy from countless footsteps over years, maybe decades. I knelt at the edge, aimed the flashlight downward. The smell rose immediately. Wet iron, sharp and metallic. The exact same odor that had drifted from the fissure 2 days earlier when I found Edward. Cold air followed, dense, almost viscous, heavier than the surface atmosphere. I glanced back toward the trail, still empty, no headlights in the lot below. Dawn was perhaps 20 minutes away. The sky had shifted from pure black to the dull slate gray that precedes sunrise. Time enough. I placed one boot on the top step and shifted my weight. The stone held firm, no shift, no creak. Flashlight in my right hand, left palm braced against the rough wall, I started down. The steps were steep. By the third one, I had to duck my head to avoid the low overhang. The walls pressed closer on both sides, natural rock, unworked except where wear had smoothed it over time. Halfway down, the beam caught a glint on the left wall. A small brass plaque, roughly 2 inches in diameter, secured with screws that had rusted orange halos around their heads. The metal itself was tarnished to a patchy green patina, but the stamped lettering remained legible. Kinzua Dam. I froze on the step. Kinzua Dam sat 40 miles northwest, near the Allegheny Reservoir, an Army Corps of Engineers project completed in the early 1960s. It had flooded an entire valley, displaced communities, created the reservoir. I'd driven past the dam and visitor center more times than I could count. Brass identification tags like this one were standard on core infrastructure across the state: maintenance access shafts, drainage outlets, service tunnels, spillway inspection ports. I exhaled slowly. Okay, a service access point, old, forgotten, but official. That explained the carved ladder grooves farther down, the worn steps, the metallic smell of iron-heavy water. It didn't explain why the park manager claimed no such feature existed. It didn't explain why Beverly's report erased the descent. It didn't explain why the dispatch log had been rewritten. Something they must have constructed back during the dam project. Perhaps an overflow channel, a drainage inspection point, or some kind of remote monitoring station they abandoned once the reservoir filled. Likely scrubbed from current maps decades ago, bureaucratic oversights happen all the time with old core infrastructure. That would account for the hidden hatch, the carved steps, the faded brass tag. It would also explain why Bo Wells claimed ignorance. State parks and the Army Corps of Engineers don't always sync their records perfectly. Separate agencies, separate filing systems, old projects forgotten in drawers. It tracked. I continued descending. After 7 steps, the stairs leveled off into a roughly circular chamber, perhaps 10 feet in diameter. The ceiling hung low enough that I had to hunch my shoulders to avoid scraping my head. The floor consisted of flat bedrock, mostly dry in the center, but slick and glistening near the perimeter where moisture had slowly wicked through hairline fissures in the walls. The walls themselves curved gently, not a perfect circle but close enough to feel intentional rather than natural erosion. No side passages, no visible doors, just this single, contained space at the bottom of the descent. I swept the flashlight beam to the right and froze. A natural ledge had been incorporated into the wall at approximately chest height, about 3 feet long, a foot deep, carved or worn smooth over time, and resting on that shelf sat 4 cloth-wrapped bundles. Each one was swaddled in what looked like old burlap or heavy canvas, secured with multiple wraps of the same vivid red synthetic twine I'd seen binding the river stone spiral up top. The knots were meticulous, tight, overlapping loops, the kind of binding done when someone wants to ensure nothing shifts or opens accidentally. The packages varied in size. One was compact, roughly the dimensions of a large coffee mug. Another stretched longer, molded around something flat and rectangular beneath the fabric. A third appeared bulkier. The fourth was the smallest. The metallic odor intensified here. Damp iron, pennies left to soak, sharp enough to catch in the back of my throat. I stepped closer but didn't touch anything yet. Just played the light over the first bundle. The cloth showed dark staining in irregular patches, and the outline of the contents pressed outward, hard angles, rigid shapes. I moved to the second, more twine layered in a deliberate crisscross pattern over the top, Whatever lay inside felt personal, curated. The third bundle, the smallest, had a tiny gap where one corner of fabric had worked loose from the binding. I leaned in. A glint of metal showed through the tear, dull, scratched steel. I tugged on my work glove, reached out slowly, and eased the loose flap back just enough. A wristwatch, Timex Expedition model, the rugged one with the Indiglo backlight feature. Crystal cracked across the face like a spider web. Leather bands severed cleanly on one side. Hands frozen at 9:42. I knew that watch. Tony Owens, local fisherman, lived out near the county line. I pulled him over twice on Route 19 for a busted left tail light. Both times let him go with verbal warnings because he was polite, apologetic, and always fixed it within days. He vanished 4 years back, mid-November. His pickup was discovered parked at a trailhead 15 miles west of Rimrock. Keys in the ignition. Tackle box still in the bed. Search parties combed the woods for a week. K9s tracked his scent into the trees, then lost it abruptly half a mile in. No body. No signs of foul play, just gone. His daughter had come to the barracks to file the report. I could still picture her, early 20s, eyes red, clutching a snapshot of her dad grinning beside a stringer of bass he'd pulled from Tiesta Creek. She described the watch in detail during the interview. Timex Expedition, scratched bezel from years of use, band he kept meaning to replace but never did. She'd even mentioned the exact model number. I stood motionless, staring at the timepiece still half buried in the cloth. This wasn't a forgotten maintenance access. This wasn't an abandoned service tunnel. This was a collection. I backed away from the shelf. The flashlight beam slid across the remaining bundles. I had no desire to unwrap the others. Didn't want to see what else had been taken, carefully packaged and stored down here like trophies. Personal effects. Items people carried the day they disappeared. Things someone had removed, wrapped with care, tied with red twine, and placed on a hidden ledge beneath the forest floor. I pulled out my phone. No bars, no surprise down here. I snapped 3 quick photos anyway, the shelf in full view, the 4 bundles, a close-up of the exposed watch, then turned and climbed the stairs fast. Boots slapped stone. Flashlight beam jerked wildly with each step. When I emerged through the hatch, my breathing came harder than the short climb warranted. The sky had lightened to a flat pre-dawn gray. Trees stood silhouetted against it. I stood beside the open hatch, phone still in hand, and scrolled through contacts. Past Cadden, past Beverly. I stopped on Lena Rybeck. Lena, same barracks, 2 years junior but rock solid. We'd worked traffic stops together, backed each other on domestic calls, traded radio traffic on long shifts. She didn't gossip, didn't second guess, didn't hesitate when it mattered. If I called her now, she'd show. She'd see this with her own eyes. That mattered, independent confirmation. I hit call. It rang 4 times. Then her voice, thick with sleep. "McCormick, it's 6 in the morning. I need you at Rimrock," I said. "East Trail past the Overlook. Bring your camera." A beat of silence. "What did you find?" "Just come, don't tell anyone else." Longer pause this time. 20 minutes, she said, and the line went dead. I sat down on the cold stone, next to the open hatch, and waited. Lena's truck rolled into the lot 18 minutes later. Engine cut, door slammed, then the quick crunch of her boots climbing the trail. She crested the rise, spotted me sitting there beside the dark opening, and slowed. Stopped about 10 feet back. "What the hell is that?" she asked. "Hatch," I said. "I dug it up. There are stairs underneath, a room." She approached cautiously, peered down into the gap. Her expression barely shifted, but I caught the subtle tightening of her jaw. "You already go down?" "Yeah." Find anything. Yeah. She met my eyes. Show me. I stood, brushed dirt from my pants, turned toward the hatch, and stopped cold. It was closed. The wooden frame sat flush again. Dirt and leaf litter had been pushed back over the edges. The spiral of river stones rested precisely on top, exactly as I'd first discovered it days earlier. I stared. Lena stepped up beside me. McCormick. It was open, I said. I left it open. I've been sitting right here the whole time. You fall asleep. No. She crouched, brushed some of the surface dirt aside with her gloved hand. The rotted planks and rusted hinges reappeared beneath the thin layer of debris, same wood, same corrosion, but the hatch sat firmly shut. The soil around the edges looked compacted, undisturbed for longer than the 20 minutes I'd been waiting. Someone followed me, I said quietly. Someone closed it while I was sitting here. Lena scanned the clearing, empty trees, empty trail, empty rock shelves stretching back toward the parking area below. No movement, no sound except faint wind in the branches. You didn't hear anything? She asked. Nothing. She straightened, unclipped her own flashlight from her belt. Let's open it again. We both gripped the frame, fingers finding purchase on the splintered edges, and pulled together. The hatch lifted more easily this time. Wood scraped against stone with a low groan. We shoved it aside, exposing the narrow stone steps dropping away into darkness once more. I aimed my flashlight straight down into the opening. The beam hit flat, unbroken stone, smooth bedrock, seamless, no trace of steps, no carved grooves, no rusted brass tag, nothing but solid rock as though the hatch had always covered bare ground and nothing more. Lena leaned in beside me, her own light joining mine, two bright cones merging over the same empty surface. We both stood motionless, staring. There were stairs, I said, 7 of them carved right out of the rock. A small room at the bottom, maybe 10 feet across with a shelf cut into the wall. 4 bundles wrapped in old cloth tied with red twine. I saw Tony Owens watch in one of them. Timex Expedition cracked crystal band snapped, frozen at 9:42. I recognized it from his missing person file. Lena stayed quiet for a long stretch. Then she straightened, turned to face me. I believe you, she said. The words caught me off guard. I'd braced for skepticism, for the slow questions that usually followed when someone described something impossible. But you can't keep doing this, she went on. Going out alone, digging up hidden hatches, not telling a soul. I only knew because you called me after you'd already gone down there. She nodded toward the hatch. What if it had sealed shut while you were inside? What if I'd shown up and found nothing but dirt and an empty shelf, and you were just gone? I didn't have a good answer. The possibility hadn't fully hit me until she voiced it. Lena glanced back at the solid stone floor below, then at me again. Write it all down. Every single detail, date, time, exact location, what you saw, what you smelled, the watch, the twine, the way the hatch closed itself while you waited. Document it like evidence, but stop coming out here by yourself. Okay, I said. She studied my face like she was weighing whether I meant it. We stood there another minute, both of us looking down at the rock where stairs and a room had existed less than an hour earlier. Then Lena checked her watch. I've got shift in an hour, she said. I'm heading back. She turned and started down the trail. I waited until I heard her truck start, until the engine noise faded completely down the access road. Only then did I sit on the cold stone beside the hatch, pull out my notebook, and start writing. Date, time, coordinates of the shelf, description of the hatch, rotted wood, rusted hinges, 3x3 frame. The 7 steps, narrow and worn concave in the centers. The circular chamber, low ceiling, damp edges. The shelf at chest height, 3 feet long. 4 bundles in stained burlap or canvas secured with bright red synthetic twine, same as the spiral marker. Sizes varied, small, rectangular, bulky, tiny. The smallest bundle partially open. Inside, Tony Owen's Timex Expedition wristwatch, cracked face, severed leather band, hands locked at 9:42. Background: Owens missing 4 years prior, truck at trailhead 15 miles west, scent trail lost half a mile in, no body. Daughter's description matched exactly. I wrote about the metallic smell, wet iron, pennies in water. The way sound had vanished underground before. The carved ladder grooves in the original fissure. Edward's calm explanation about people under the rock and their blocked river. The spiral of river stones that had reappeared perfectly positioned after the hatch closed itself. The solid, featureless stone where the room should have been when Lena arrived. My hand cramped. I kept going anyway, page after page, until the ink started to smear from sweat and the cold. A week later, the call came in about Tony Owens. Dispatch: elderly male missing from vessel. Kinzua Dam spillway area. Boat located drifting, engine still running. I was already moving toward the Crown Vic when Linda added the details. Vessel registered to Anthony Owens, age 71, Warren County address on file. I knew Tony, not close but enough. I'd pulled him over twice in 3 years for that same busted left tail light on his old Chevy pickup. Both times he'd been hauling fishing gear, thermos jammed between the seats, and had talked my ear off about the dam while I wrote the warning citation I never actually issued. Retired Army Corps of Engineers. He worked the Kinzua project in the early 60s, flooding the valley, building the spillways, sealing old channels, leaving access points for maintenance. He spoke about every gate, every drainage tunnel, every hatch they'd capped or left open like they were family stories. Proud, precise, the kind of guy who remembered torque specs from 50 years ago. I drove straight to the spillway access road. Early afternoon, air cold enough that my breath clouded when I stepped out. The gravel lot held 3 vehicles. Tony's familiar Chevy with the bad tail lights still unrepaired, a Park Service pickup, and Mark Figg's dive team van already back to the launch ramp. Mark stood at the water's edge with 2 team members in dry suits. I walked down the slope and stopped beside him. He gave a single nod. Boat out there. He pointed about 50 yards offshore. I followed his finger. Small aluminum fishing boat, maybe 14 feet, drifting in a slow, lazy arc. The outboard idled quietly, just enough throttle to keep it from stalling completely. No one visible aboard. "Anyone been on it yet?" I asked. "Park Service pulled alongside 20 minutes ago," Mark said. "Confirmed empty, didn't board, waiting on us." "Jacket?" "Yeah, folded on the bench seat. Neat, like he set it down to put on later." That detail settled wrong in my gut. I watched the boat drift. Beyond it, the massive spillway gates loomed, 100 yards out, enormous concrete slabs with water roaring down in thick white curtains. The sound rolled across the reservoir, low and constant, vibrating the air. "You going out?" I asked. "Soon as we're geared," Mark replied. "We'll check the immediate area first, then run sonar if we don't find anything quick." I nodded. Tony Owens, 71, retired Corps, fished these waters his whole life. He knew every inch. Mark jotted that in the small waterproof notebook he kept in his vest pocket. "Any medical issues you know of?" "Not that I'm aware, but he wouldn't just fall overboard. Not here, not him." Mark didn't argue. He tucked the notebook away. "We'll board the boat first, then sweep the perimeter." I stayed on shore while Mark and his two divers motored out in their inflatable. I watched them ease up alongside Tony's drifting boat, kill their engine, and tie off. One diver climbed aboard, slow, careful, methodical. He checked the floorboards, the seats, the open tackle box near the stern. He lifted the folded jacket, examined it front and back, then replaced it exactly where it had been. He looked toward Mark and shook his head once. No blood, no signs of a fight, nothing disturbed. They cast off and began a slow circle around the boat. All three leaned over the gunwales wearing polarized sunglasses, scanning the water surface and just below it. I saw Mark point at something, lean farther out. The man at the bow reached into their gear bag, pulled a gaff hook, and extended it down into the water. It took 2 attempts. When he finally hooked it, I saw the thin monofilament fishing line still attached, taut, angled sharply downward, snagged on whatever lay below. The diver pulled steadily. The rod tip broke the surface first, then more line, then the rod itself. Tony's favorite spinning rig, the one he always talked about. Still clipped to the line, still snagged deep. They brought it aboard carefully. The line stayed tight, leading straight down into the dark water beneath the boat. Mark's radio crackled on my belt. I unclipped it quickly. "McCormick, you copy?" "Yeah, go ahead." "We've got a line here, snagged deep. Runs straight down into what looks like a grate or drain. Can't see the bottom. We're suiting up to follow it." "Copy that." I watched them motor back to the launch ramp. All three climbed out, peeled off their outer layers, and methodically pulled on full dive gear, tanks, masks, weights, fins. It took about 15 minutes. Then they walked backward into the cold water and vanished beneath the surface. I stood on the gravel shore for 23 minutes. I timed it on my watch. Tony's boat kept drifting in lazy circles offshore. The spillway kept roaring, water sheeting down in thick white curtains. A few cars passed on the access road behind me, but none stopped. No one else came down to the water. When Mark finally surfaced, he swam to the shallows, stood up, and pushed his mask onto his forehead. Water streamed off his dry suit in rivulets. "Drain," he said, breathing hard. "Submerged maybe 8 feet down. Old core maintenance access, probably original dam construction. Grates intact, but the gaps are wide enough to snag a fishing line. Your guy's line is wedged in there tight. No body. Visibility drops to 0 past the grate." "Can you get inside?" "Not without cutting the grate," Mark replied. "And we'd need federal authorization for that. It's core infrastructure." I glanced back at Tony's boat. The jacket remained neatly folded on the bench seat. "Anything else?" I asked. Mark hesitated. Then he reached into a pouch on his dive belt and pulled out a small waterproof evidence bag. Inside was a plastic key fob, the kind you clip to a lanyard. Tony's name was written on it in faded permanent marker. "Found it hooked on the grate," Mark said, "right next to where the line was caught." I took the bag. The fob was scratched and worn, the exact style the Corps used to issue to workers for site access decades ago. Tony would have carried it every day for 30 years. "Thanks," I said. Mark gave a short nod and waded back into the water to rejoin his team. I walked the shoreline while they finished their sweep. The rocks were slick with algae where waves lapped up. I moved slowly, scanning the ground, the brush line, the gaps between boulders. 30 feet from the launch, I found it. The spiral. Smaller than the one at Rimrock, maybe 2 feet across. Smooth, dark river stones arranged in a tight coil, bound with bright red synthetic twine. The same careful knots, the same even spacing. It sat on a flat section of rock just above the waterline, positioned where no casual angler would place it by accident. No logical reason for it to be there at all. I crouched beside it and pulled out my phone. Took 4 photos, wide shot including the shoreline and spillway in the background, close-up of the twine, close-up of the knots, one straight down from above. Then I stood and looked out at the water. The spiral faced the spillway directly, pointing toward it, or perhaps marking the nearest shore access to the submerged drain below. I didn't touch it. I walked back to the launch, climbed into the Crown Vic, and sat there with the engine off until Mark's team hauled their dive boat out and loaded their gear. Mark came over to my window. I rolled it down. "We're done here," he said. "I'll file the report tonight. Probable accidental drowning, body not recovered. We'll keep the site flagged for another week in case anything surfaces." "Okay. You knew him a little?" I nodded, "Yeah." Mark looked tired, "Sorry." He walked back to the van. I waited until they drove off. Then I sat another 10 minutes, staring at Tony's boat still drifting in slow circles offshore. That night at 9:47, a message came in from Patricia Owens. Text first, "Deputy McCormick, this is Patricia Owens, Tony's daughter. I need to send you something. Can I call?" I replied, "Yes." She called 3 minutes later. Her voice was tight, crying earlier but holding it together now. "They told me they found his boat," she said. "Yeah, I was there, but not him." "Not yet," I corrected gently. "Dive team searched, they'll keep looking." She was quiet for several seconds. I could hear her breathing uneven. "I got a voicemail," she said, "from his phone 2 hours ago." I sat up straighter. "What did it say?" "Nothing, I mean no words, just sounds. I'm going to send it to you." "Okay." She hung up. 30 seconds later my phone buzzed with the audio file. I opened it and pressed play. First came water, slow, thick movement. Not rushing but heavy, the way it sounds underwater or inside a pipe. 7 seconds of that. Then tapping, rhythmic, slow, metal on stone or something hard dragged across rough surface. Tap, pause, tap. 9 times exactly. Then the water sound returned, louder, and the recording cut off abruptly. Total length, 41 seconds. I played it again, then a third time. The tapping followed a pattern, regular intervals, deliberate, like fingers finding grooves, like someone climbing. I saved the file and stared at my phone. Then I opened contacts and scrolled past Cadden, past Beverly, past Lena. I stopped on Isaac Fitzgerald. Isaac had been my training officer when I joined the department. Retired now, 64, maybe 65. Lived alone in a small house off Route 6. Rarely came into town. Rarely answered unless the message mattered. But he'd worked this county 32 years. He remembered things other people forgot or refused to talk about. I called at 10:00 p.m. He picked up on the 5th ring. "McCormick." "Yeah." "You working?" "No, I need to ask you something." Silence on his end. I heard a television in the background, volume low, then it clicked off. "Come by," he said. I drove out, 22 minutes. The house was small, single-story, white paint peeling near the gutters. One light glowed in the front window. I parked in the gravel driveway and walked up to the porch. The door opened before I knocked. Isaac stood there in old jeans and a flannel shirt, no shoes. Iron gray hair cut short, thick mustache that didn't hide the hard line of his mouth. "Inside," he said. I followed him into the kitchen. He gestured at the table. I sat. He poured 2 mugs of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been sitting since morning and set one in front of me. Then he sat across and waited. I told him everything. Edward Wood, the crack at Rimrock, the ladder grooves, the red sneakers placed deliberately, The hatch I dug up, the bundles inside Tony Owen's watch. The way the hatch closed and filled in when I turned away. The spiral at Rimrock, Tony's disappearance. The second spiral at the spillway. The voicemail with the tapping. Isaac didn't interrupt. He drank his coffee and listened. When I finished, he set his mug down and leaned back. You ever hear the term tender? No. Old families used it, he said. Local term. Means someone who keeps watch over an opening, marks it, leaves offerings, makes sure it stays known. An opening to what? Doesn't matter, Isaac said. What matters is the tenders believed in them. Believed the openings needed attention, needed respect. They marked them with red twine, spirals mostly, sometimes crosses or other shapes, kept them clear. Left things, food, tools, clothes, anything that might be asked for. Asked for by who? Isaac looked at me. His eyes were pale hazel in the kitchen light. By what's under, he said. That's what they called it, not people, just what's under. I stayed quiet. The dam drowned a lot of the old valley, he continued. Flooded passages, caves, old mine shafts. Some of them had been marked for generations. When the water came up, the tenders had to find new ones. Openings pushed into strange places, higher ground, rock shelves, spillway drains. They followed the signs and marked them again. What signs? Kids wandering off, Isaac said. Cold air where it shouldn't be. Things left behind that didn't belong to anyone local. Sounds in the water. I thought of Edward's blackened palms. The way he'd climbed those grooves without hesitation. You believe that? I asked. Isaac shrugged. I believe the tenders did, and I believe people still go missing in places the tenders used to mark. He stood, walked to the counter, refilled his mug. Didn't offer me more. I cut red twine once, he said. His back was still to me. 23 years ago, found it on a trail I used to hike. Spiraled just like the ones you saw, thought it was litter, some hippie nonsense, so I cut it and threw it away. He turned around. His face looked older, worn. 2 days later, my wife, Catherine, started waking up with mud under her fingernails. Every morning she'd scrub her hands raw before bed and wake up with dirt packed deep, black and wet. She didn't sleepwalk, never had, but every night she'd wake up somewhere else in the house. Basement, porch, once in the backyard, standing barefoot in the garden. I didn't move. It went on 4 months, he said. She got thin, couldn't sleep more than an hour at a time. Doctors found nothing. Then one morning I woke up and she was gone. Found her in the basement, hands flat on the concrete, fingernails worn down to nothing. She was trying to dig. He drank his coffee. She died 6 weeks later. Heart gave out. Exhaustion, coroner said, but I know what it was. He set the mug down. I went back to that trail. The twine was back. New spiral, same spot. I didn't touch it. The kitchen was quiet, except for the refrigerator humming. So what do I do? I asked. Isaac looked at me for a long time. You stop cutting twine, he said. The next morning, I went to Cadden with everything. Protocol, chain of command. I walked into his office at 7:30 before shift briefing, laid out the notebook, phone photos, the audio file from Patricia, Isaac's account about the tenders and Catherine. He listened, took notes on a yellow legal pad, ballpoint clicking every few seconds. When I finished, he set the pen down and folded his hands. You need to stop this, he said. Not what I expected. I came in with evidence, I said. Physical items, recordings, witness statements. We need to investigate. Cadden shook his head once. What we need is for you to let this go before it destroys your career. He opened a desk drawer, pulled out a thin file folder, maybe 3 pages, and slid it across. Amy Richmond, he said. Internal Affairs, she's been asking about you. I didn't touch the folder. Asking what? Unauthorized site visits, tampering with evidence, filing contradictory reports, involving civilians in active investigations without clearance. He tapped the folder. She's building a case. Right now it's preliminary, but if you keep pushing, spirals, tunnels, disappearances that don't exist on paper, she'll open a full inquiry. And once that happens, I can't protect you. The disappearances do exist, I said. Tony Owens is in the system. Edward Wood's parents filed. Edward Wood was found on the trail. Safe. Returned to his parents within an hour. That's what Dispatch logged. That's what Beverly reported. That's what happened. That's not what happened. Cadden leaned back. Then you're calling your colleagues liars. You're saying Dispatch fabricated records. You're accusing park management of a cover-up. Do you understand how that sounds? I understood exactly. Something taking people, I said. There are openings, marked openings, the tenders. Stop, his voice went flat. Don't say that word in this building again. The room fell quiet, just the hum of fluorescents and distant radio chatter from the bullpen. Cadden pulled the folder back, opened it, scanned the top page. Amy Richmond doesn't believe in ghosts. She doesn't care about local folklore or old stories. She cares about documentation, procedure, officers who follow protocol. He looked up. If you give her ammunition, she will end you, not suspend, not reprimand, end. I didn't speak. I'm ordering you to stand down, he said. No more solo trips to Rimrock. No more digging. No more calls to civilians about closed missing persons cases. You work your shifts. You file clean reports. You let this go. And if I do... He closed the folder. Then I can't help you when Richmond comes. I left his office at 7:52, passed Beverly at her desk. She didn't look up. Went to the locker room, sat on the bench with my jacket still on, notebook still in my pocket. I held to the order for a day, maybe a day and a half. Took calls, wrote reports, kept my responses short, my radio traffic minimal, but the notebook stayed in my pocket, heavy, pulling at me constantly. Every time I drove past Route 19, I thought about the access road to Rimrock. Every time I saw water, I thought about the spillway. At night, I sat at my kitchen table, flipping through pages. Edward's sneakers, the hatch, the bundles, Tony's watch, the spirals, the voicemail tapping, and I couldn't make it add up to nothing. 2 nights later, Lena vanished. Dispatch called it in at 22:47. Deputy serving warrant at seasonal cabin near Kinzua Bridge State Park. No radio contact for 38 minutes. Last check-in. Subject not on premises, cabin secured. I was 12 minutes out. I took the service road past the bridge overlook and found her unit parked crooked across the gravel turnout. Driver's door wide open, interior lights still on. Her radio clipped to the dash. Her jacket folded neatly on the passenger seat. Her flashlight beam aimed at the dry creek bed 20 feet past the tree line. I called her name, no answer. I pulled my own flashlight and followed the beam down into the creek bed. Smooth stones, exposed tree roots. No water, probably hadn't run in years, maybe since the dam went up. 30 feet in, I found the spiral. Bigger than the others, maybe 4 feet across. Same river stones, same red twine, same tight knots. And in the exact center, face down, lay Lena's badge. Not dropped, placed, like someone setting a table. I crouched beside it, didn't touch the badge, took 2 photos, then stood and swept my light along the creek bed. The stones sloped downward, following the old water line. 50 yards ahead, the creek passed under a service road through a culvert, dark, round concrete mouth, maybe 4 feet in diameter. I walked toward it, stones crunched under my boots. Cold air drifted out of the opening. Same smell, wet iron, pennies in water. The culvert mouth was woven over with sticks and something else. Thin, dark strands, hair, maybe, tangled through the gaps like someone had braided a net and stretched it across the entrance. I pulled my knife and cut through it. The strands parted easily but left sticky, warm residue on my glove. I felt like I'd broken a seal that was never meant to be broken. Inside, the concrete tunnel ran only 6 feet before transitioning to rough stone. Walls curved and narrowed. My light caught horizontal grooves carved into the left side, evenly spaced. Same as the crack at Rimrock. Same as the stairs under the hatch. Ladder rungs. Bundles lined the tunnel floor in a row, bigger than the ones at Rimrock, maybe a dozen total. I counted 9 before my light hit the first one I recognized. Tony's green thermos, the dented one he always kept between the seats of his truck. I'd seen it both times I pulled him over. 3 bundles down, a set of handcuffs, standard issue. I crouched, lifted the fabric with my knife tip. Lena's name etched into the steel. I stood fast, aimed my light deeper. The beam didn't reach the end, just kept going into darkness. "Lena," I called. My voice didn't echo, it died flat. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming toward me from the dark ahead. Lena walked into the light. Her arms hung stiff at her sides, uniform clean, no dirt, no tears, but her eyes were wrong, black, shiny like wet stone. She moved without bending her knees much, stiff, mechanical, like strings pulled from above. She stopped 10 feet away and stared. I said her name again. No response, no blink. Then her mouth opened and she spoke, but the voice wasn't hers. Deeper, layered, 2 people talking at once, slightly out of sync. "The old tender is gone," she said. "The new one must be marked." I pulled my sidearm, aimed center mass. My hand didn't shake, but my chest felt tight. "Let her go," I said. Lena tilted her head. "You went down for the child. You opened the hatch, you cut the seal, you're marked." I thought of Edward, the crack, the ladder grooves, the silence when I dropped through. "I didn't choose it," I said. "You descended," the voice answered through Lena's mouth. "That is choosing." I lowered the pistol, not all the way, just enough to show I was listening. "The river," I said. "Tony told them about the blocked river, that's what this is. The dam, Kinzua. It flooded the valley, blocked the old passages." Lena's head tilted the other way. "The water cannot move, we cannot sleep. The tender keeps the openings clear, marks them, feeds them." I remembered the brass tag, Kinzua Dam, the maintenance tunnels, the old core access points Tony had worked on in the 60s, the passages flooded when they filled the reservoir. I holstered my weapon, pulled the notebook from my pocket, tore out a blank page. I crouched, picked up a river stone from the tunnel floor. It was warm, shouldn't have been, but it was. I wrapped the paper around the stone, took the red twine I'd pocketed from the spillway spiral, tied it around the bundle, 3 tight knots. I set it on the ground between us. "I'll take the mark," I said, "but you let her go, and you stop taking people who didn't choose it. No more kids, no more deputies, no more fishermen, just me." The tunnel shifted, not moved, but shifted, like something massive leaned closer from every side at once. The bundles rustled. I felt air change, pressure. "Wait." Lena blinked, once, twice, like waking up. Then she collapsed. I caught her before she hit the ground. She coughed. Black water came up thick, smelling like wet pennies. She coughed again. More came. I dragged her back toward the culvert opening. Dead weight, boots dragging, arms limp. The pressure in the tunnel eased, but the cold followed. It wrapped around my right wrist, invisible, tight, like a knot cinching. I pulled Lena out into the creek bed. She coughed again, less water this time. Her eyes were normal again. Hazel, wet, confused. "McCormick," she said. "I've got you." I dragged her up the creek bed to her unit, got her in the passenger seat, drove her to the Warren barracks. Cadden met me in the lot, took one look at Lena, coughing black residue into a towel, and told me to take her inside. Medic checked her, pulse elevated, temperature low, lungs somehow clear despite the water. Cadden filed it as exposure and confusion, ordered us both to stop spreading details, told Lena to take 3 days, told me to go home. Within a month, Lena quit, moved back to Eerie, took a desk job dispatch, wouldn't work anywhere near water, wouldn't take night shifts. I went home that first night and scrubbed my hands raw in the kitchen sink. Hot water, dish soap, scrubbed until my skin turned red. When I dried off, I saw it. Thin red band around my right wrist. Looked like a mark from tight fabric or a watch worn too long. But I hadn't been wearing anything. It hadn't been there that morning. I leaned over the sink, stared at the mark, tried to rub it off. It wouldn't budge. Then I heard tapping from the drain. Slow, rhythmic, metal on stone or something hard on rough surface. It counted upward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Steady, patient. Like something below had accepted the trade and started keeping time.